My name is Alan Higgins, first name Alan, last name Higgins, and I'm currently the president of the Preservation Alliance of Evansville.
Okay. So talk to me first of all, I guess, about the importance, so the historical significance of some of the buildings in Evansville and the importance of preserving them.
To me, the built resources of our community, they are the identity, the stories of our places. Our community, its history is reflected in the places that we build, how we adapt them over time, how we change them, the places that we demolish. All of that reflects on our story and what we as Evansville want to say about that story, the places that we find important. And so when we look at these places and we identify those that are significant to our community and we invest in them and reinvest in them over time as assets, we're promoting that story, the importance of retaining it. And for groups like the Preservation Alliance, that's the primary thing that we want to put to people is that these places are assets, not only for their architectural, historical significance, but also for the life of the community. And each community is different, and Evansville is very much different than every other community. And the places that we have, they're irreplaceable. You don't get the same places in any other community. You may get some similar places, but they are unique to Evansville, and to lose those, it's certainly a travesty when it happens.
Talk to me about how you went about the process of sort of choosing the top nine, and the process that the group went through to pick the top nine.
Personally, going through the top buildings in Evansville, it's not an easy task to do that. You can easily come up with a list of 100 places, but to me, getting diversity was really important in the top buildings in Evansville. Not only geographic diversity throughout the city, but also in terms of property types and what they represent for the city. And so looking at residential properties and commercial, as well as the rich industrial legacy of the city of Evansville. All of those should be represented in the top consideration for the buildings in Evansville. As a group, obviously personal biases and things like that come into play, but there are those key buildings that everybody identifies in Evansville that they would hate to lose, that they're easily identifiable, and they certainly represent the story and history of Evansville. And so, it was kind of a play of both the personal interest and of individual persons, as well as those assets that everybody recognizes are important to the community.
Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the ones that you think maybe should have been on the list that you were an advocate for, but that didn't end up making the cut?
There are those personal favorites that everybody has, and to me, two of them are the Helfrich houses out on the west side of Evansville. They're kind of these lost architectural icons of the early 20th century. One of them you pass by on Mesker Park Drive on the way out to the zoo, an exquisite circa 1915 arts and crafts residence. That you may not really notice if you're just passing by, but if you really kind of get out and walk along the sidewalks there and take in the detail, it's just fantastic. And on the opposite hillside, now surrounded by modern development, but was the residence of his brother Michael Helfrich, and it's just a beautiful 1920 prairie style design that everybody seems to think is designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, because it's that fine of detail. But it was a Clifford Chopwell design. It's certainly one of in my mind, the most important architectural icons in Evansville of the 20th century, and they've kind of been lost over time to some of the more exquisite places of the late 19th century. So those are two of the favorites that I hate to see not make the list. Then you have places like Globe Bossy World Furniture, which has been changed. Some of the office buildings, the industrial buildings are still there, have been modified and things, but just the industrial legacy that's represented by those buildings, you just don't have that. They're essentially the last vestige of that legacy in Evansville, and to me, they still are top caliber buildings that we should recognize as part of that history.
Well, when we did make our kind of final list, you voted for the old courthouse as the top building. Talk to me a little bit about why that was number one, and a little bit of the significance of that building.
Yeah, I mean, the old courthouse, it is, in my opinion, the most significant architectural statement ever made in the history of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. You've got to think about when that was being built, and Evansville was coming to the forefront. It was developing as the regional commercial center, the regional residential center, and industrial center. And so for Evansville and in Vanderburgh County, the construction of that courthouse, it represented the attainment of power for Evansville throughout the region and throughout the state. And so it was a vestige of the community. It wasn't just simply a building to go and hold office. It became the representation, the physical manifestation of the community. And so, that legacy it maintains with the building, even though it's no longer used as offices. It's still, people come in there, it's instantly recognizable as that's what it was, and it still has that legacy attached to it. And thinking about everything that transpired when they were talking about moving out of there in 1969 and the government offices moved over to the Civic Center, there was a push to demolish the courthouse. That was no longer needed. It was seen as a potential financial burden on the community, and so there was a major push to get rid of it. And luckily at the time, there was a group of citizens that established a committee, ultimately came to be named the Conrad Baker Foundation, that really pushed to save the courthouse and to reuse it. And so they did that, and it's gone through a couple iterations of that, and is currently undergoing restoration as well. And so just thinking about, the what ifs, if that would have come down in 1969 to where we are now, when we're putting money back into it and it's being adaptively reused for office spaces for photographers and architects, and other professionals. It's just a major transition, and really a testament to the citizens of Evansville that they recognize the importance of the place.
Talk to me a little bit about when you talk about the historical significance, can you kind of give me a history lesson on the building? When was it built?
Yeah, the courthouse was finished in 1890. Offices moved in 1891. The architect was Henry Walters of Louisville, Kentucky. It really is an exquisite building inside and out. The design is German Baroque. And if you take a look around the building, a lot of people may miss the statuary that fronts all of the entrances. There are 14 human-sized sculptures that enwrap the building across the pediments. And in between that, you have fruits and vegetables and other native products of Indiana, again, representing the industrial, the commercial activity of Evansville at the time. And just the craftsmanship of that. If you imagine the effort that it took to get the limestone to the site, to dress the limestone, to finish it out, just the undertaking of it at the time, it really is a testament to the craftsmanship of the workers. And on the inside too, they wanted the inside to be as elegant as the outside was. Again, it was representation of the community, and so you see that in the Georgian pink marble, the white marble of the floors, the plaster work and detailing. And to me, my favorite feature is certainly the black slate staircases that go from the basement to the third floor, and you can just see over time where the footprints of hundreds of thousands of persons have worn that slate down. And you can physically step in the grooves of the politicians and elected officials and everybody else that went through the courthouse over its long history. It's just a really finely detailed building, both exterior and interior.
Why do you think you mentioned that people really do recognize the importance of it and they rally to save it? Why do you think the building is so significant to people in Evansville?
Yeah, I mean, the significance, to me, it is the most important statement that was ever made in Evansville, and it is a representation of the community. At any given time, there are always community landmarks that are going up. You had things like the Coliseum, or post office, again, community buildings of the period. But the building that the government chose to occupy, to represent itself with, that says something about that building, and I think the community recognized that. And you look at anything from when it was built to current times, and the old courthouse still, it's that icon of Evansville. It's on postcards and brochures, and nothing speaks to the city of Evansville like the representation of the courthouse, and I think that's been recognized since it was originally constructed.
Talk to me a little bit about the rights of it. Anything that you feel comfortable saying about that, architecturally or anything else?
Yeah, to me, the Wrights home is the crown on the Riverside district. Certainly throughout that district, you have many fine residences of the industrialists of the period, the businessmen of the period, but the Wrights home is certainly the jewel on top of that. Historically, as well as by way of the current work and interpretation that's being done there as part of the Wrights Home Museum. And it's one of the most finely detailed buildings on the period. I happen to love the cast iron work on the exterior, the coins on the exterior of the stonework. From top to bottom, it's just a fine piece, and like I said, it really does set off the entire historic district.
Okay. I won't be late.
Yeah, that's...
The old post office. Talk to me about why that is significant, and give me a little history lesson on it as well.
Yeah, the old post office and customs house is another one of those, like the old courthouse, that really came to represent the community. It actually predates the courthouse by about 20 years. Established because of the trading activity on the Ohio primarily, Evansville was designated as a port of entry to the United States, and so that's why a custom house was located here. And so in the 1870s, they began to develop plans for it, and by about 1877, 1878, it was in the finishing stages. And it's, the post office to me is one of those buildings that you could walk around for hours and just take in the detail. It's kind of on the fringe there of downtown, essentially, as you go toward the riverfront and where the modern development has creeped in. But if you walk around it and just take in the stonework, the very intricate stonework that encapsulates that entire building, it really just is remarkable and striking, and its high Victorian Gothic architecture. It's a tremendously beautiful building.
Again, talk a little bit about why it is significant to Evansville, why people identify with it, and why it's been saved over all these years, because obviously it's not still being used for its original purpose.
Yeah, like the courthouse in 1969, it was vacated. It was no longer used, and so it sat there. And so the pair of those two icons of Evansville, they're the identity. They were people recognized as that longstanding tradition of Evansville. They're this massive, imposing sort of interpretation of the city of Evansville and its place in the late 19th century, and sort of this romantic aspect of Evansville as this industrial, very booming commercial center of activity. And I think those buildings continue to represent that legacy, and that's what's primarily resulted in their restoration, their preservation over time, and continued use to today for both of those.
Now, what is it primarily used for now, the old post office?
They just finished a renovation of the interior of that building, and Social Security currently moved into the second floor spaces of that building. And then they've put in catering spaces on the first floor in various offices. So like the courthouse, it's one of those that people recognize the benefit to maintaining and reusing these buildings, and have adapted it for modern purposes while still retaining that important character on the exterior.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, that's probably good. Yeah.
Talk to me about the Greyhound station in downtown Evansville. Again, a little bit of a history lesson, but then also why is it significant?
Yeah, the Greyhound, it's, if you ask most people in the community, you have those iconic favorites of early Evansville history, like the post office and courthouse. But I think it would almost be rivaled by the number of people that say that the Greyhound is probably their favorite building in Evansville. It's certainly iconic and something that everybody recognizes, whether it's for its architecture or just the remembrances of actually being in the station and using it over its history. So it's a unique sort of icon. It's later than most of those, but again, I would venture to guess that it would rival probably in importance in the minds of a lot of people in Evansville. And to me, it certainly is a favorite. I'm very much a fan of the modern aesthetic, and there is nothing in Evansville that represents that modern aesthetic better than the Greyhound station. Crafting that circular facade, the interpretation of motion, of speed, just attracting the attention of the passerby when it was constructed, and reflecting the business model of Greyhound was efficient, fast service, and so they captured that in their building, and the materials, the sleek materials, and the construction and massing of it. All of that was designed to really interpret what Greyhound wanted to put out as a service. And so it continues to represent that, and will be brought back with the current restoration of the exterior. But it's it's a beautiful building, and supposed one of the two remaining from from Greyhound's blue period of construction. And we certainly all hope that with its restoration, it will be the most noted example of that blue period.
Again, talk a little bit about how it sort of fell into disrepair, because it has obviously. I was in there this morning. It's not pretty right now.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the state that it's in right now and how it got there?
Yeah, after Greyhound moved out of that station, it's just set vacant, and so the finishes that they had installed over time, the drop ceilings, so a lot of spaces had been infilled with concrete block walls, and it really took away from the character of what was there, the openness, the lobby spaces, sitting areas, ticket booths, and all of that really made the spirit of the Greyhound. It had been lost through the years as Greyhound updated their facilities, and so as you move into modern times, all of that still remained to be taken out to bring it back to its former glory. And Indiana Landmarks and the city working together with one another to make sure that icon wasn't saved. Again, it's one of those that everybody recognizes and rallies around to recognize that importance. And you'd hate to see it lost, and the work that Indiana Landmarks has been doing, and the architects that they brought in to do that, it really will capitalize on the features that made the Greyhound what it was, and we'll bring it back to that.
Talk to me about what's happening there now and sort of what the plan is going forward with it.
Yeah, the complete interior of the Greyhound has currently been opened back up. All of the concrete block partitions have been removed. All of the drop ceilings have been removed, and it's been taken back into one open space. Unfortunately, a lot of features aren't currently there. Some of the ticket counters were taken out over point. But you do have some original features. The original telephone space is still in there. You can see some of the ghost lines where these features were. The interior colors, there's still fragments of that. The handrails going up to the mezzanines on either side of the space. There are really nice details throughout. And so Indiana Landmarks, they've made effort to retain that as part of the effort of essentially gutting what was put in later in order to enable it to be brought back to life. So currently it's sitting there for occupancy on the interior. More immediately, the exterior is going to be restored. The panels over time were painted actually a deep blue color, which a lot of people think is original, but it originally was more of a teal color, and so as part of the restoration, they'll be reinstating that original color, and so all of the panels are eventually going to be removed from the building, stripped down, and then they'll be recast in their original color to bring back that really sharp icon on the corner there. I really think it's going to be one of those things that you drive by and it instantly catches your attention, much like it did when it was built in the 1930s.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about Greyhound? What can you say about Willard? Again, if it's architectural, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I mean, I've been in the building, obviously, but Willard to me, it's of the period when the courthouse was being built and the customs house, and so it's that rich Gothic tradition of architecture with the heavy, imposing stone. And to me, the most significant feature of Willard Library is its structure. It's sort of the interpretation of a library as a fortress of learning, almost the kind of castellated structure, and through its stonework, through the detailing that really is manifested in the actual construction work. So to me, those are the key features of the building. On the interior, obviously, the rich oak woodwork that wraps throughout that, and the staircase that goes up through the building would have to be another favorite feature of it.
Okay. That was pretty good, actually.
That's all I got.
Moving on, the Hallman building. Talk to me about the Hallman building and again, a little history lesson and why it's significant.
Yeah, the Holman building, it's prominently situated there in downtown, and I think of the hundreds or thousands of people that pass by that every day in their cars or walking down the street on their phones, and you always wonder, how much of the detail people have really noticed on that building. In some instances, you may look at it and you just see the stonework and it may not be much to look at, but as you look up the building and you take in the rich carvings, the anodized bronze work, the steel work and aluminum in that thing, it really is an exquisite structure. And certainly to me, it represented the opulence of the 1920s. If you think of the 20s before the Depression, it was that period of luster, of extravagance and exuberance. And the Holman building is the articulation of that in Evansville. Unfortunately, it happened to be constructed in the Depression era, finished 1928, 29, 30. And then the Central Union Bank, which was the original tenant, went out of business in 32 for the Depression. So you had this very richly detailed structure, interior and exterior, and all of a sudden it was without a tenant. And you would hate to lose something like that, even at that time. And it really didn't see a second life until 38 when Tony Holman of Terre Haute fame, they would eventually own the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, purchased the building at public auction for about $500,000 and saved the building and really worked to get new tenants in there and make sure that it was continued to be used. The Southern Indiana Gas and Electric was its most prominent tenant after Central Union Bank, until Commerce Bank moved in there more recently. But it's one of those buildings again that just walking by, if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss it. But if you take the time to actually look up and walk around the full detail of the building, you see things like zeppelins emerging from a genie's lamp almost in some of the carvings, factories, trees and the carvings. it's an exquisite building, and luckily the current tenants they've respected that on the interior. A lot of people haven't peeked into the interior space. But it's one of those that I always recommend if you're passing by, just take a quick peek in the door, because you'll be surprised at what's in there. The gold elevators, the richly detailed cornice work in there, and then in the bank space as well. The original customer counters are still there. The lighting fixtures. It's a remarkable building. It's a tremendous asset to Indiana and Evansville.
Talking about how nice it is to have a bank in there now too, because that was what it was built for. I mean, you've got a bank that's actually in there.
Yeah, having Commerce Bank as the tenant there, just to maintain that legacy of the original structure and its use. Central Union Bank went in there in 1929, 1930 when it was finished, and was the primary tenant. They held the first floor as well as second and third floor, and above that it was professional office space and dentists and doctors and things like that. And so to have that life brought back to it in a bank, and to be able to reuse original features, the customer counters and things like that, it's really just remarkable. And you can't pick a better story than that. And to have somebody that respects that integrity, those character defining features, and to really be utilizing those and proud of them, you just couldn't have a better outcome for it.
Let's talk about Bossy Field.
Yeah, Bossy Field, it's a gem of the community. To me, the thing that I think about when I think about Bossy Field is just the legacy of use there. Constructed in 1915, it's still used for its original function. And if you think of buildings in Evansville where that's the case, outside of Willard Library, for example, Bossy Field is probably the longest continuously used community building in Evansville. We're coming up on the 100-year mark here, and to be able to say that, it's just a tremendous testament to the foresight of folks like Mayor Bossy, who originally sponsored the construction of that and pushed for it, and all the citizens and participants and teams over time. It really is a rich legacy there, and it's just again, it's one of only two in Evansville that have really reached that century mark of use, and will certainly surpass that going into the future.
What, I guess, that's one that, they've talked about building other baseball stadiums, they've talked about doing other things, but there's just a passion for Bossy Field. Why is that, do you think? Why do people around here have such a connection to it?
You walk into Bossy Field, and my family and I, we go to games, and you just walk in there, and you're taken into that atmosphere. It's not just going to an event, it's becoming a part of that event. And I think a lot of people in Evansville, they rally around that. They remember going to games there, whether, whatever team it may have been, going back all the way back to the River Rats that were originally there, or the NFL team that was there for a period in the 20s. People remember that, and it was an experience to them. And you go back to that today, and, the stadium's seen changes and things like that, but you're still brought back into that atmosphere, and you're engaged, and you're carried forward into that. And so I think that legacy and that sort of pulling in to be a part of the history of Bossy Field, that's really what, to me, I think most citizens in Evansville would rally around and have rallied around to make sure that it's been continuously used and continues to serve as a community landmark in the city.
As far as architectural significance, anything like that, is there anything worth talking about there?
Yeah, the architecture of Bossy Field, it's changed over time. Originally, when it was constructed, it was clad in a white stucco. Obviously, now it's brick on the exterior, which was added about in the 1930s. The original entrance was modified at the time to its current appearance as well. And you've had changes like ticket booths and things like that. But the architecture has changed, but it still very much reflects the period of which it was constructed, and the grandstand and just the feel of that. You don't see those sorts of things. And so as an architectural feature of the landscape, while it may not be entirely original, it still is significant on those counts as well.
Okay. What can you say about Olmsted Hall?
Yeah, Olmsted Hall is, the thing I think about Olmsted Hall, and probably in the larger context of Evansville and school buildings of the period, is just that movement toward the collegiate Gothic architecture you'll see at places like Olmsted Hall. You see it at Bossy, Washington, and so you have that interpretation of these modern fortresses of learning that adapted traditional Gothic detailing and crenellations on the roof and parapets and massive stone walls that are certainly imposing, not necessarily to scare people away, but just to recognize the importance of those places as substantial, places of the community. And so Olmsted Hall is very much a product of that throughout the community, and is one of the more iconic of those that were built during the 1920s.
Gerst House.
Gerst House, it's another personal favorite. It's one of those places that, people go to for the food, and they may not necessarily pay attention to the architecture and look up at the detailing of it. But if you take the time, stand outside for a few minutes before you go inside to get your meal and look at the cast metalwork on that building, you just don't see that anywhere else in Evansville. To me, it certainly is probably the most exquisite turn of the century commercial building in Evansville. And so it kind of encapsulates all of the details that went into that period. And beyond that, it's also this vestige of Franklin Street and the rich history there. Originally occupied by August Rosenberger and Klein as a wholesale grocer. They stayed there until about 1920, 1925, and then it turned into a hardware store. Helton and Volker took it over, and they stayed into fairly recent history. And so kind of the vestige of these commercial enterprises that really propelled Franklin Street again as its own little sector there. All of that's tied up in this building, that we have a specific use for now in a restaurant, but that legacy is still there. And the outside of it certainly reflects that. It is, pristine in almost every detail. So it's one of those, again, I encourage people to go out and take a look at it and just look up and take in some of that rich detail of the metal casting work that's done there, because it's, again, you just don't see that anywhere else in Evansville.
Talk about some of the details that people should look for when they go to that building.
The cast metal storefront, Evansville happens to have a rich tradition in that. George Mesker of Evansville, him and his brother, who happened to be in St. Louis, they really propelled that business industry in the 19th century. And so while it hasn't been confirmed that this is an actual Mesker storefront, it's very much representative of that. And so you have the cast iron pillars that flank the entrances and the storefront windows there on the first story facade of the building. And then as you move upward, if you look above the canopy that currently covers that storefront, the cast paneling, these really rich inset panels that space between the windows going up into the second and third stories there, they're just really remarkably detailed, and the handiwork that went into those to press that metal and to set it into the building, it's just a fantastic piece of sculpture work, really.